This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
This week, to be closer to China, socio-economic imbalances are China's and the world's critical problem. The digital divide between those who have internet access and those who do not was the context for a ministerial forum bridging the digital divide held in Wuzhen, East China's Zhejiang province, at the 5th World Internet Conference. How is China employing the internet domestically to reduce imbalances, especially in poverty reduction?
中国政府特别注重电商、电子商务的发展，这样就使得很多偏远乡村的农民啊，他通过在电商的平台上，把他自己的一些特产就可以卖出去。
Can China's experience be shared internationally to help less developed countries?
So I think we have a lot to learn from China. We have a lot to exchange, and the best idea for both of the continents is to work together.
This week, be closer to China. Socio-economic imbalances are China's and the world's critical problem. The digital divide between those who have internet access and those who do not was the context for a ministerial forum themed Bridging the Digital Divide, held in Wuzhen, East China's Zhejiang province, at the 5th World Internet Conference. I was pleased to participate, moderating a session on digital divide and economic development. The world is facing a severe digital divide. Zhuang Renwen, Minister of Cyberspace Administration of China, called for speeding up internet connectivity and usability so as to narrow the digital divide among different countries, areas, and groups so that more people can take the express train of internet development. How is China employing the internet domestically to reduce imbalances, such as in poverty reduction? And how can China's experience be leveraged internationally to help developing countries? The Wuzhen World Internet Conference keeps us closer to China. According to the World Internet Development Report 2018, released at the conference, the number of internet users globally were over 4 billion in January, a rise of nearly 200 million within 1 year. Europe enjoys a more mature internet development, with North Europe having the highest internet coverage rate of 94%, followed by West Europe, where the internet coverage rate is 90%. In Africa, the internet infrastructure is relatively backward. North Africa has the highest internet coverage rate of 49%, while Central Africa has the lowest at 12%. The 5th World Internet Conference, held in Wuzhen, Zhejiang province, had the rather elaborate theme, Creating a Digital World for Mutual Trust and Collective Governance toward a Community with a Shared Future in Cyberspace. I was invited to moderate the forum, Bridging the Digital Divide, focusing on economic development, with more than 20 speakers from 14 countries, including ministerial officials, heads of telecommunication companies, scholars, and experts, sharing their experiences and offering their thoughts. What was the reason behind China Daily focusing on digital divide at this Wuzhen summit of the World Internet Conference?
As I put it, I think two keywords of this forum are bridge and divide. And as some of the speakers refer to the idea that there is the hard divide and soft divide of the digital divide. Hard divide in terms of infrastructure, and soft divide, say, in terms of mentality, ideas, conscientiousness. I think it's important to have the bridge. In order to bridge the digital divide, first of all, we have to have the bridge between the doing world and the understanding world. So that's where I think media comes up for its role. What we are doing here is to try to promote the conscientiousness and in the broader sense, the consensus on why it's important to bridge the digital divide.
The theme of the World Internet Conference here in Wuzhen is a community with a shared future for cyberspace. What does that mean for cyberspace?
共享一个虚拟的空
As
间
for
呢，
sharing a virtual
随着技
space,
术进步，
as technology
人类呢
advances, people increasingly exchange knowledge,
虚拟空间中
information, and
进行
development
沟通
experience in the
沟通
virtual space.
世界各
This is a
国
new space
全人
brought
类
about by new
能够来
technologies.
共同分享
Objectively
它带
speaking,
来的成
due to
果
a disparity in the
有
growth of
的
technology,
国家呢
the
相对
fruits of
比如
this
说
new space have yet to
技
be
术上
shared by all.
落后一
Some
点，
countries
或者
lag
说经济
behind
实力上
technologically or
差距大
economically.
一点。
Between
在这些
underdeveloped
欠发达的
countries
国家
and first movers,
和
a
先进
gap
国家之
exists
间
in
的
terms of
它的
infrastructure,
无论是从
governance
基础设
system,
施
and online
是一个客观
services.
现实。
The existence of a
国际
digital
社会
divide is an
还是需要
undeniable
努力
fact,
来
which
尽
requires
可
the
能地
international
来
community
填
to
补
bridge
这
the
个
gap.
数字鸿沟。
How would you define the digital divide, and how significant of a problem is it for today's world?
应该说呢，世界发展是很
Objectively
不均
speaking,
衡的。
global
从我
development
个人
is
的观
uneven.
察呢，
From my
技术
observation,
进步
on the
本
one
身
hand,
呢，
technology upgrading
它一方
itself
面
widens the gap
是
between
拉大了
nations, since
国
the
家之
first
间
movers
的
tend to
差
advance
距。
quickly, while
在
latecomers
先进国
make
家进步特
relatively
别
small
快，
steps.
后续的国
On
家
the
呢
other hand, however,
相对来
we
说
see
比较
the
慢。
positive
但
phenomenon
另
of
外
the
一方
digital
面呢，我们也
threshold
看到一个好
lowering
的
as
现象，
technology
就是随
upgrades.
着技术进步
For
啊，
example, to
使
access
得
the internet in the
数字化的
past,
门槛
one had to purchase a
在下降。
personal computer,
以
which
前
involved
比如
building a
说
significant number of
无线通讯
servers
技术进
and
步
a
以后，
communications
在
network
哪
for a
怕在非
particular
洲，你可以
country.
看到，
Today,
它
with
花
better wireless
相当于几
communication
百块钱人民
technologies in
币，
place,
它就
even
可
in
以
Africa,
进
a
入
digital
到
world is
数字化
accessible
的
at a
世界
cost
里
of
面去。
several
所
hundred
以应该说门
RMB.
槛是
Thus,
下
the
降了。
threshold has been
但是
lowered,
如果说
though in
从
general
国家
terms the
整体来
national
衡
gap
量的话，
remains wide.
差距还是很大的。
How has China Daily, for example, in China's own digital divide between urban and rural, inland and coastal, in terms of the stories that you tell, in terms of the interest that you show in the developing parts of China, is that something that is a part of your mission?
I think so. It's the story. It's the idea of my story. When I visited Jiangxi, there is in general, I think, generally speaking, the penetration of internet, the rate of that is in China is much higher than the average of the world. But there is still a huge difference between the western inland parts and the coastal parts of China. So that is why the government, the central government, had the idea to pair institutions like us, like China Daily, with some people in the inland parts of the world. So what China Daily is doing in Jiangxi, Huichang in particular, is to introduce, to kind of play a bridge between the, say, entrepreneurs of the coastal regions, or even in Beijing, with the farmers, say, in our county in Jiangxi. But generally speaking, I think the infrastructure is fairly good. So the soft divide is more important than the hard divide. That's
in China.
In China, it's the mentality, it's the skills of using the internet. The internet is already there. It's there already. Now, people are more important.
China's internal imbalances, of course, is one of China's greatest problems, and that gap seemingly has been getting wider over the years, but the capacity of the internet, as you've explained, really has helped bridge that gap within China. We've talked a little bit about e-commerce. How about other kinds of social services which are so difficult and expensive to create in the traditional bricks and mortar sense, such as healthcare and education, two of the most important social services that we have? How can the internet help bridge the vast difference in quality in China between urban and rural areas in healthcare and education?
您讲的呢，这我觉得是
I
未
believe
来
the
啊，
internet is set to be a
互联
crucial
网
channel
可以
to
在
narrow
缩小
regional
地区差距
gaps.
方面呢
The quality and
非常重要的
accessibility of
渠道。
education
所以
and
以前
healthcare
很多公共
services
服务，
vary
你刚才
significantly,
讲的
as
教
you
育
just
啊、
mentioned.
医疗啊，
In recent years,
在地
Chinese
区之间的差异
organizations
呢，
conducted
从
some
质量上
trials,
来说，
such as
可及
online
性上来说，
courses,
差
with
别
the
是
aim
很
of
大
bringing
的。
benefits to
那么
people in
近些
remote
年呢，
areas
中国
with
的
little
一些机
educational
构
resources.
也做了一些
At
尝
an
试，
initial
比如
stage,
说
such
在互
programs
联网
required
上呢，
joint efforts
提
from
供一些
governments,
教育的
NGOs,
课程，
and business
这样就在
organizations
偏远
in
地
order
区
for
的
more
它
diversified
就可
and
以能够
cost-effective
通
services,
过在互联
including
网上学
healthcare.
习，来
One
解决呢这种
outstanding
教育
issue
资源
exists
的
when medical
不均衡的
resources
问题。
concentrate
但
in
这个工作我觉
megacities.
得还刚刚
As
起步。
technology
远程的
upgrades,
医疗服
we
务
must figure out
正
how
是
to
缩
use
小
the internet for
城乡
remote
差距、地
diagnosis
区间
and
差距
medical
一个
services.
非常重要
It
的
is a
渠道。
significant
这个
challenge
可
to
能我觉得
bridge
也
the
取决于
urban-rural
两方面，
gap.
一个是
To achieve
进一
this
步的技
goal,
术进
I
步。
believe
现
there
在
are
呢，
two
这个
determining
为
factors.
前景已经展
One
示出
is
来了，
further
但是呢还没
technological
有真正的
progress.
开展起
These
来。
days, we already see
第二
this
个呢，就是
prospect,
即
yet it
便这
has
个技
not
术
been
进步
truly
了，但
realized.
还是需要
Secondly,
相应
when
的机构
technology
啊，
is
特
in
别是一
place,
些
relevant
高水平
organizations,
的
in particular expert
医
doctors,
生啊，
must
才能够
join the
参与到这
experiment
个
of remote medical services
互联
offered
网
online.
远程医疗的这个事业里面来。
The internet has developed rapidly in China, second only to that of the US, especially in internet applications and industrial development. With the policy of facilitating faster and more affordable internet connections, China's network infrastructure keeps improving. However, the country's regional internet development remains unbalanced. According to the 40th Statistical Report on Internet Development in China, nearly half of the country's population remains unconnected. Almost 3/4 of the rural population and over 1/4 of the urban population still have no access to the Internet. Connecting the unconnected and enabling balanced development are major challenges for the Chinese government. The digital divide in the world is very obvious between developed and underdeveloped countries. And what I'd like to do is explore China's own experience, because China itself is, in a sense, a microcosm, an example of the world, because there's very highly developed areas in China, along the coast, the major cities, and then some rural areas, many that are virtually developing countries without a digital capability. So what, from the Chinese experience of dealing with the internal digital divide in China, can China then provide experiential lessons to other countries?
中国呢，就像您所讲
China, like you said, represents a vast territory with unbalanced
所以
growth.
在中国的
A
地区之
digital
间
divide
也
exists
是存
between
在
Chinese regions,
数字
but we have
鸿
seen
沟的。
great improvements
但是我
in
觉得中
narrowing
国
the
政
gap
府啊
through the
和企
hard
业呢
work of the Chinese
采取了多
government
方面的
and
努
private
力，
enterprises.
在弥补数
On
字
the
鸿沟
one
方面
hand,
呢，还是取
thanks
得
to
不错的
government
成效。
policies that have been backed
一
by
个方面呢，
coordinated
就
central
是
government
由中央
efforts,
政府
mobile
统筹
telecommunications
推
infrastructure
动
has seen a dramatic
所有的地
upgrade,
方呢，
and the
在
regional gap
通
is
讯基
already
础设施
very
方面
small.
的
On the other
大
hand,
幅度的
we have
提升。
several major
应该
telecommunications
说，
enterprises that
就
offer
是要
universal services
普
as
遍
part
服务
of
的一
their
个义
obligation.
务。因
In
为在
some
很多偏
isolated
僻的地
places,
方，
it is not
你要
economically
去
viable to build
建
cell
这个，比如
sites.
说发射
It
的
doesn't
发
make
射
sense
站。
economically and may even
第三
result
个我
in
觉得很重要
long-term
的就
losses.
是中国特
Given
别
that,
注重
we
技术
have a
进步。
domestic
我
coordination
们国
system
内
to
无论
ensure
是像电信
universal
设备
services
上，
are
像
provided
华
even
为
in
啊、
remote
中
places,
兴通信啊
making the
等等，
internet
他们不
available
断
to
地
people
来
living
研发
there.
新的设
One
备，
lesson we
同
have
时呢，
learned is
使
to
得
let
整
the
个
internet serve local
要
development.
让
For
互联网
example,
呢
in recent
对
years,
当
the
地
Chinese
的
government
发
has
展
paid
呢
close
有
attention
利
to
益。
e-commerce.
你比如
Even
说
people
这些
living in
年，中国
remote
政府特别
villages have
注
sold
重
their wares through
电
online
商、
business
电子商
platforms,
务的发展，
exploring
这样就
domestic
使得
and
很
even
多
international
各种各样的
markets.
机构，包括媒
Besides that,
体，不断
favorable
地去
government
宣传，
policies and the
去
publication of the
普及互
internet
联
by
网
various
的这种
organizations
信
also
念、
played
互
their
联网
due
的知
roles.
识，其
I
实也起了
believe
很
best
好的作用。
practices
我
from
觉得中
China
国
can
在
also
这方
serve
面
as a
做的
reference for other
一些
countries
成功的
and the
做法，
wider
其实
international
对
community
其
to
他国
bridge the
家、对
digital
国际社会
divides.
消除
Situations
数
clearly
字鸿沟
vary
呢
from country
也
to
有一定的
country,
参考价
and it
值。
may
当
not
然，每个国家的
necessarily
情
be
况不
good
一
to
样，
copy
也不一定
China's
说可以去
approach.
照搬中国的做法。
And what would be the applications of that
that from China as China develops itself, do you think what China is achieving here is transportable into other areas?
Of course it is, because the internet is a global phenomenon, and the take-up of the internet is also a global phenomenon. I have been learning a lot about how the society in this country is taking up, for instance, the payment, the mobile payment, something which is very slowly going in Europe. I have been learning about e-commerce, which is very quickly taking up, and which is in Europe a question of the young generation. But not for the average citizen. So I think we have a lot to learn from China. We have a lot to exchange, and the best idea for both of the continents is to work together.
Facing the expanding demands of the information revolution, cooperation between internet communities seeks to narrow the digital divide. The fourth China-EU Digital Economy and Cybersecurity Experts Working Group, held in May 2018, focused on digital economy development, digital finance, and AI. After unveiling the Digital Silk Road as part of the country's Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese government is promoting internet infrastructure, especially with African countries, and engaging leading Chinese enterprises like Alibaba and Tencent. China stresses that these projects aim at common development and prosperity and are committed to the principles of extensive consultation, joint construction, and shared benefits. Nevertheless, some observers point out how China also benefits from its aid to Africa.
There are, of course, concerns that I hear in the U.S. and I'm sure you hear in Europe about China's engagement with the developing world and Africa, for example. Does that pose some kinds of risks or some kinds of challenges to the traditional Western world? How do you respond to that?
Well, it depends what you are doing in Africa. If you help Africa to develop, that is in the interest also of the European Union, because you see that the poor Africans, if they have no future in Africa, they are going north and they are coming to Europe. They don't come to China. So if China helps us to develop Africa, that is a positive thing.
What would be your concerns? What challenges do you think China might face that you could give advice in terms of China contributing the best of what China can do, but yet avoid some of the difficulties?
Well, the question is not to buy a part of a country. The question is to help the people who are living in this country to be capable to stay there, to make a living, to develop their families and the wealth of their families. The big danger is that those people, the most brilliant ones in these societies, move out and they are lagging then in the society. Another element is to help to avoid that dictatorships take over, and to help democratic regimes to establish themselves. So I think we should give each other a helping hand in order to help the continent of Africa to develop in an equilibrated way.
Culture Express. See the world in color.
Triangle, circle, or both? A story can take on a whole new meaning when looked at from a different perspective. I'm Wuzhen. Join me as I seek the hidden truth, asking direct questions to get answers that are to the point. Challenge your perceptions, Monday through Friday on CGTN, and get to the point.
While the fundamental driving force of internet development is to benefit all people everywhere, there remains a big digital gap globally in terms of internet coverage, technology, and application. Addressing the Fifth World Internet Conference, President Xi Jinping noted that internet development has no boundaries and offered that China is willing to work with the international community for the common good, to uphold the concept of cyberspace sovereignty, and to make the global cyberspace governance system fairer and more relevant.
How can you foresee cooperation between Europe and China in terms of bilaterally in terms of the two countries in digital areas, but also as together you can help in the global bridging of the digital divide?
Well, alone the words which you are using are important. You said bridging. And we in Europe see the communication and the relation between the continents with the bridges. We are different. But we are different also inside Europe, so we are used to build bridges between the differences. And through this you become strong. So we say the same thing to China. Let's try to bridge our differences, and let's try more and more to establish reciprocity, also in the way companies can go from one continent to the other and establish themselves. I believe that with reciprocity, that with openness and with real exchanges, we can both of the continents really flourish.
As you go forward and from your experience in seeing how China's developed the internet in China, what do you think are the challenges, some of the obstacles that one may face to be sure that ahead of time we know what the problems are? Because if we think everything is just going to be wonderful, we could get in trouble.
The internet, the world of the internet is something quite new, always for us. Not only now, it's going to be new in 5 years, in 10 years' time. It's always going to be newer. So what we know about the internet already is only a very, very small portion of the whole understanding of the internet. So as you put it, I think we can't come up with is very good ideas for everything. We have to deal with one problem after another all the time.
So if you project forward for 10, 15 years, China has set a goal of 2035 and then 2050 as its long-term goals. What would be your projections as an economist in terms of the digital divide, first within China and then in the world?
We proposed a medium and long-term development strategy. That is, by 2035, to have essentially realized modernization, and by 2050, to have built a strong and prosperous socialist country. Today, we have entered the information age. The modernization we talk about today is different from the concept mentioned 30 or 50 years ago. Going forward, the goal of China's modernization drive, undoubtedly in an era of digitization, informatization, and virtual internet space, is to firstly embrace more advanced technologies to connect the world. Secondly, it is broader participation, enabling more people to get involved in the digitization process. We see a pretty high penetration rate when it comes to phones, but there is still great potential to be tapped into. I believe broader participation of the general public is also part of the meaning of modernization. In addition, we must diversify online content. Internet technology is like building a highway or a big house. To have cars running on the highway or various books in the house, good hardware alone is not enough. In addition, useful, sound information must be brought into the digital world. This is also a crucial part of modernization. As you just mentioned, we can easily access digital libraries, distance learning, online shopping, and various services, including medical care and legal consultancies. And many more similar services will be provided online going down the road. Modernization, from my perspective, is a double-edged sword. Along with the convenience brought about by modernization, issues of data security and privacy protection also crop up. Modernization in this sense, I believe, requires technological means, laws, and regulations to make the internet healthier and more secure.
We've talked about the potential benefits and the achievements that can occur. In order to get there, what are some of the obstacles that are faced, the challenges, the problems, so that we can know what these obstacles are up front to overcome them, but not talk about just how wonderful it'll be, but to recognize what are the serious problems in making it happen?
Technology still represents a bottleneck. R&D must be carried out. For technology advancement, on the one hand, we pursue higher capacity and faster speed. On the other hand, security technology must be adopted to make the internet more secure. So I believe the technological progress of the internet is a critical part of overcoming technology bottlenecks. Without proper governance, negativity may spread. Governance can be extremely complicated, since the internet is a relatively new entity. People don't see eye to eye on many issues. Coming up with domestic laws requires consensus or mainstream perspectives before the so-called global governance norms take shape. On this front, we have seen huge divergence with several problems. For example, when it comes to big data, how can we define its ownership? How can we protect its ownership? There is no domestic or international consensus. Without consensus, relevant laws and regulations cannot be made. Personally, I believe that, for the internet, we must be well prepared for new questions and challenges that come along. We must do our utmost to conduct predictive research to respond to problems, taking advantage of the progression of information technology. In terms of challenges and downsides, we will try to control them. That is, we will draw on advantages and avoid disadvantages.
President Xi Jinping's letter set the tone for the Wuzhen summit. Internet penetration, AI, and big data transforming the global economy. Internet applications for poverty alleviation and rural e-commerce. And building a digital government and a smart society. In China, the digital divide is shrinking. The percentage of the population using the internet has increased from only 1.7% in 2000 to 55% in 2017. There are more than 8 million online shops on Alibaba's e-commerce platform. China is ready to contribute its knowledge and experience to developing countries. For example, how China's Taobao villages use e-commerce to sell directly to consumers, bypassing middlemen. Bridging the digital divide is not only about building network infrastructure, but also about cultural and educational factors that inhibit or promote digital literacy. One mustn't forget cybersecurity. Without network security, there can be no national security, no economic security, no social security, and no personal security. In addition, big data is putting personal privacy under attack. Determining the global governance of cyberspace will help shape the future of the world. That's closer to China.